For those of you just coming in, we have 4.5 minutes on the do now, which is in your Google Classroom assignment. Three and a half minutes left on the do now. Just under 3 minutes. I like that we are taking our time and really encouraging those responses. Just over 90 seconds. "45 seconds on the do now. "10 more seconds. Go ahead and click submit and submit whatever you have completed. Thank you. I have a response. I have 3 responses. 4 responses. Again, go ahead and click submit even if you did not finish. I want to make sure that you were engaging with the do now at the beginning. It's okay if you did not finish. Thank you. I have 6 responses. 8, 9. Thank you guys. While we are clicking submit, I am sharing the link to the Nearpod one more time. Again, you are going to have to be in it because we have a lecture today, so you need that to follow along. So there is that in case you do not have it. Thank you. I have 11 responses, so I'm waiting on about 10 more. Okay, we are going to go ahead and transition back to the Nearpod for our lecture. So please take the next 30 seconds to set up your Cornell notes. You can still take notes in the Nearpod as well, so long as you remember to email those notes to me. And the name of today's lecture is The Road to Revolution, 1754 to 1783. So today we are going to be looking at the road to revolution, the revolution itself, and ultimately why the United States decided to declare and win independence. I'll give us another 15 more seconds to set up our notes. Great, please chat a 100 into the chat if you are ready to start taking notes. Thank you, Leah. Thank you, Arabia. Thank you, Michael. Again, as soon as you're ready to take notes, please type that 100. Thank you, Dwayne. Thank you, Shakeem. Thank you, Yabdi. Thank you, Soraya. Thank you, Takia. Thank you, Samaj. Thank you, Heaven. Great. As a reminder, this video is being recorded and will be posted on today's Google Classroom assignment. So if you are not able to catch everything in the lecture, please go back and fill in your notes. I will not be able to pause as frequently during today's lecture because it's very hefty and there's a lot of information. So again, if you do not get everything written down, you can come back to the video and fill in your notes either during your break or after class. And as a reminder, your notes need to be submitted at the end of the, by the end of the day, whether that be emailing them to me through Nearpod or submitting photos of them in the classroom assignment. So now that we are all set up and have expectations clear, let's go ahead and get started. So as a reminder, in the left-hand smaller column, you are going to write British colonies. And in the right-hand column, you are going to be listening for these key terms and writing down those definitions. To understand the causes of the American Revolution, we're going to begin with the causes of the French and Indian War. Until that time, the British had an unofficial policy of salutary neglect. Salutary neglect, that's one of our key terms. And salutary neglect meant that the English basically left the colonists alone and let them govern themselves. So again, salutary neglect is England letting the colonists govern and manage themselves. This cost Britain nothing and made the colonists pretty happy and continued to provide British with wealth from tobacco and their shipbuilding. So again, the colonies are getting left alone, but Britain is still able to profit. The British had passed a series of navigation acts. It's another one of our key terms. The British had passed a series of navigation acts, which aimed to restrict colonial trading and shipping. So we're restricting colonial trading and shipping in a way that is going to benefit the British. But these laws were mostly ignored by the colonists, and the British didn't really stop them. So again, the navigation acts are being ignored by the colonists. However, larger issues were at play in North America, mostly competing for land and resources. British colonists were looking for good land and seeking to spread west. However, Native Americans were competing for control over the fur trade and trade network. While at the same time, Europeans, both the English and the French, are competing to increase their colonial wealth under the economic system of mercantilism. It's our last key term for this slide, mercantilism. And this is a system where a colonial power makes its wealth off of its colonies. So for mercantilism, a colonial power makes the profit off of its colonial colonies, off of its colonies. Give us another 15 seconds to finish jotting down those notes. Now we're going to zoom in on the French and Indian War. All of this tension led to the French and Indian War. And almost immediately after the war broke out, colonists created a representative Congress and created the Albany Plan of Union. The Albany Plan of Union. Albany sounds a little familiar. That's this Albany. And the Albany Plan of Union was formed to raise taxes and gather troops across the colonies. Again, raise taxes and gather troops across the colonies. I'm going to pause here really quickly. As a reminder, you are listening for these key terms and that you see on the slide and writing down those definitions. Do not try to write down every single word that I am saying, otherwise we will get stuck. Okay, now coming back. Initially in the war, the British struggled, which led them to create a treaty with the Iroquois Confederation called the Treaty of Eston. So Treaty of Eston is one of our key terms. The Treaty of Eston was signed in 1758. And again, this is a treaty with the Iroquois Confederation. Iroquois is spelled I-R-O-Q-U-O-I-S. And again, this was signed in 1758. And this treaty agreed that the British would stop moving westward. So the British colonists would stop moving westward in exchange for the Iroquois staying out of the French and Indian War, or staying neutral during the French and Indian War. The war ended with the Treaty of Paris in 1763. And this ended the war with British victory and essentially removed France from most of North America. So the Treaty of Paris in 1763 provides Great Britain the win in the war and essentially moves France from North America. which leads us to more conflict between Britain and its colonies. Again, if you are getting lost, you can come back to the video and fill in your notes. And remember, you're not trying to write down every word that I am saying. So I'll give us a moment to write down the title of this slide, Conflict Rose. The end of the French and Indian War led to a lot of conflict between the British colonists and Native Americans. Because colonists refused to stop expanding westward, this led to a large Native American uprising known as Pontiac's Rebellion. Pontiac's Rebellion was in 1763, and again was because British colonists refused to stop moving westward onto native land. And this rebellion lasted for 3 years. In response to this rebellion, the British passed the Proclamation of 1763. Proclamation of 1763. And this proclamation stopped colonists from settling westward. So again, this stopped colonists from expanding westward. And it stopped colonists from settling westward beyond the Appalachian Mountains. Appalachian is spelled A-P-P-A-L-A-C-H-I-A-N. A-P-P-A-L-A-C-H-I-A-N. The Appalachian Mountains. And the significance of this proclamation is that it ends salutary neglect. This ends salutary neglect, which means that the British are taking more control over the colonies. We're now going to look at another effect of the French and Indian War, which is British debt. The British are now dependent on the North American colonies. Because of the debt from the French and Indian War. So again, the British are now dependent on their colonies after the French and Indian War. And so to fix their debt problem, the British began passing a series of taxes on the colonies. The first tax is on sugar. So the Sugar Act of 1764, which is a tax on French sugar. The next tax is the Stamp Act of 1765, which is a tax on all paper goods. So again, the Stamp Act is of 1765 and puts a tax on all paper goods. And later in that same year, the British pass the Quartering Act. So again, the Quartering Act of 1765. And the Quartering Act of 1765 requires colonial assemblies to provide for the food and lodging of British troops. So this requires colonists to take care of British troops in their homes. And this affects the poorest colonists most. So again, they passed the Stamp Act, the Sugar Act, and the Quartering Act. We're now going to look at how the conflict continues. The British continue passing taxes through 1767, and the colonists continue to resist, which is when they coined the phrase, "no taxation without representation." So again, no taxation without representation. But this time, things began to turn violent. In March of 1770, the Boston Massacre happened. The Boston Massacre. Where British soldiers opened fire and killed 5 colonists, which continued to fuel anti-British feelings. So again, British soldiers fired on and killed 5 Boston citizens. And this added to anti-British feeling. As time went on, radical patriots organized and enforced boycotts and non-importation movements. So again, radical patriots are organizing these non-importation movements, which are boycotts, and encouraged colonists to make their own goods and not buy anything from Britain. So again, we're not buying anything from Britain. And finally, in In 1773, got my days mixed up, 1773, the Boston Tea Party happens, which is where a group of Bostonians boarded British ships, broke open chests of tea, and dumped them into the harbor. So I'll repeat that one more time since I messed it up. 1773, the Boston Tea Party, a group of Bostonians boarded British ships, broke open all chests of tea, and dumped it into the harbor. This leads us to the British response. Sorry, that made me laugh. So looking at the British response, the British begin to pass a series of acts known as the Coercive Acts of 1774. The Coercive Acts of 1774 were designed to make Massachusetts pay for the tea destroyed. So again, it punishes Boston for the Boston Tea Party by making them pay for everything destroyed. These laws closed Boston and reduced the power of the Massachusetts governing body. This led to a growth of the Committee of Correspondence. The Committee of Correspondence. And the Committee of Correspondence exchanged letters about the suspicious British activity. So the Committees of Correspondence is a group of colonists who exchanged letters about the suspicious activity in Boston. In one of these letters, George Washington wrote, "The cause of Boston now is and ever will be considered as the cause of America." So again, the Committees of Correspondence is a group of colonists sending letters back and forth, keeping each other in the loop about what is happening in the colonies. We're now going to look at the onset of war in the colonies. The Coercive Acts led all colonies, except for Georgia, to send delegates to a convention in Philadelphia known as the First Continental Congress. So again, the First Continental Congress is in Philadelphia in late 1774. And this was a group of colonists determining how to react to the British. First, the delegates demanded a repeal of all of these coercive acts, which the king dismissed. But what this leads to is a feeling of unity amongst the colonists. So the First Continental Congress creates a sense of unity amongst the Congress. And ultimately, this leads to the onset of war. At the Battle of Lexington and Concord of April 1775, the first shots of the American Revolution are fired. And 2 months later, at a battle known as Bunker Hill, it was obvious that this was not going to be a quick fight. A Second Continental Congress was formed, where the colonists attempted to make peace and pledge loyalty in the Olive Branch Petition, but the king refused. So again, the colonists tried to make peace with the king and Britain, but the king refused. However, after more than a year of fighting, the Continental Congress began to favor independence. And so, on July 4th, 1776, the Congress adopted the Declaration of Independence. So again, during the first year of the war, Congress did not want the fight to keep going, but the king refused to listen. And so in 1776, the Congress adopted the Declaration of Independence. And the Declaration of Independence declares independence from Great Britain. I call it a very lengthy breakup text between colonists and Great Britain, where the colonists list out their grievances with the King of England and that they had the right to form a new government. We're almost there, guys. We're now going to go into the Revolution. When the war began in 1775, there were major differences between the American and British forces. In the colonies, there were two groups of people. You had the Patriots, who were American colonists fighting for independence. So again, the Patriots are American colonists fighting for independence. And in the colonies, you also had a group of loyalists. And loyalists are colonists that remain loyal to the British Crown. So again, the Patriots are colonists fighting for their independence, and the loyalists are a group of colonists that remain loyal to the British Crown. An example of some prominent loyalists are members of the Anglican Church. I'm going to put that into the chat. So you can make sure you copy that down. And the Anglican Church is the colony's portion of the Church of England. So because of religion, they tend to stay more loyal to the English crown than for fighting for independence. The war was very the Patriots and the American colonists, while they were united, they were honestly they were not well equipped. Most soldiers had little or no experience, whereas the British had a well-trained army. So again, the British have a well-trained army, and the colonists don't really have experienced soldiers. They don't have a lot of materials. They're not in a good place. And this takes us to the turning point of American victory. At the Battle of Saratoga in 1777. The Battle of Saratoga of 1777. The colonists won this battle, which brought foreign aid to the American cause. So American victory at the Battle of Saratoga brings foreign aid to the American cause. First, France sides with the colonists, followed by Spain and eventually the Netherlands. And this alliance provides the colonists with much needed supplies, troops, and a navy. So again, as these foreign powers that allow the colonists to win. 4 years later, in 1781, we have the Battle of Yorktown, which is an incredible song in the Hamilton soundtrack. Of course, I love Hamilton. At the Battle of Yorktown in September of 1781, George Washington, with help from the French, surrounds the city of Yorktown, which forces a British surrender. So the Battle of Yorktown officially ends the American Revolution in September of 1781. In 1783, the colonists and the English signed the Treaty of Paris, another Treaty of Paris. So the Treaty of Paris is signed in 1783, which officially recognizes the independence of the United States. Which marks the end of the war. And now the Americans have the next job of building a new nation. I'll let you guys finish up your notes. Now is a good time via the chat to send me messages if you need any clarifications on anything that I just discussed in the lecture. So please use the chat to send any lecture questions. Okay, so we have so there is a Treaty of Paris that ends the French and Indian War in 1763. And another Treaty of Paris which ends the American Revolution in 1783. The Loyalists are a group of colonists that remain loyal to the British Crown. And an example of loyalists are members of the Anglican Church. Just for a quick clarification, I might have misspoken earlier. Just as a reminder, on July 4th, 1776, the Declaration of Independence was written and adopted by the United States, which officially declares the independence of the colonists from from Great Britain. In the Declaration of Independence, they list all of their grievances towards the king, like all of the taxation without representation, things like that. And also says that they have a right to form a new government because they are being abused by the British government. Thank you, Caleb, for flagging that. I will let you guys know in just a moment. Okay, we're going to go ahead and pause there. If you have any other questions about the lecture during your exit ticket, please let me know. I do need to edit the exit ticket very quickly because I realized that it's not correct. Because it has the Treaty of Paris, but it doesn't say which one. Okay, so if you please refresh your exit ticket, you should be good to go. That is it for today. Once you submit your exit ticket, you are free to go. Please, please chat me if you have any other lecture questions and I will fill in the blanks. We should all be working on our exit ticket. This exit ticket is going to be graded for accuracy, so please take your time and make sure you fully answer the questions. Alonzo, Alexis, and Caleb, you may go. For number one, make sure you are answering the question, what is the most significant effect of the French and Indian War? It's most significant. Eddie, you may go.